here in the perimeter, there are no stars. Out here, we is stoned, immaculate.
Hello and welcome. This is the C86 show. I'm David Eastaugh. As you know, we love a special guest. This week it's going to be the turn of the jazz saxophonist and composer. It's the one and only Larry Stabbins, who I spoke to very recently to find out more about life, love, poetry and all that other groovy stuff. Has had a prolific life in music, working with such people as Keith Tippett, but then in the 80s was in the band Weekend with Simon Booth, and then went on to be part of Working Week, which was from the sort of mid-80s into the 90s, releasing quite a few albums, and has continued playing music ever since. So this is the interview, so you'll find out all about Larry and much more. So after several minutes of interesting but casual chat, we get down to the exciting subject of the early formative years. Larry, it's over to you.
It's difficult to remember because it was a long time ago. I was born in 1949, and I started playing. I started learning classical clarinet at school when I was 8, but I didn't like it, and it put me off clarinet and classical music forever. But at the same time, my father had been a professional musician in the 30s and still worked as a semi-pro. So, and he also dealt in instruments. So there was, he did some repairing and a bit of buying and selling. So there was a soprano in the house, soprano saxophone. So I started playing that quite quickly. And it was the heyday of, this was, I don't know, late 50s, I suppose. It was the tail end of the trad boom, and Acker Bilk was a local hero, so I was heavily into Acker Bilk rather than Mozart.
Yes.
So I sort of got in me, then it was Sidney Bechet on the alto, and as soon as I was big enough to actually play the tenor, if I put it on the arm of the armchair, I started playing that when I was about 10.
Blimey, so you were a very early developer of this. So that was 1959. So was your sort of father or parents, were they quite hip? Were they kind of beatniks?
No, not at all. No.
Really? No.
My father had played, he played a bit of everything. He ran a band in Weston-super-Mare in a hotel in the 30s for about 10 years, which was a resident band in a hotel. And he played originally trumpet, and he also played a bit of saxophone, and then eventually switched to drums. And my mother played some piano. She was a girl from the Welsh Valleys who became a teacher, like a lot of girls from the Valleys did. So she played piano, and I did my first gig with my dad's with a band that my dad was in. He got me a gig in a band when I was 12.
Right, my God. So you were an early developer. Were you the only child, or were there any brothers or sisters? You were the... Yeah. Yes. So did they have great kind of, ambition for you?
Yes, they wanted to be a lawyer, an architect, or a doctor, or anything sensible, but definitely not a musician.
Right. So was it Weston-super-Mare that you grew up?
Bristol.
Bristol, in that area. So how did he navigate? Well, how did they navigate the Second World War? Because they would have been that age where it would have been very much in their consciousness. Were they in Bristol during that period?
No, my father had originally trained as a tinsmith, so he spent the war in Southampton repairing Spitfires who'd been shot down. So he was in a protected occupation, which really irritated him, and he complained a lot about later on about how he wasn't allowed to go out and fight. But he was basically the Spitfires, particularly that had been shot but were recoverable, went to Southampton, and he was one of the guys that repaired them. And my mum working because she was a teacher, I think that might have been a protected occupation as well. She was somewhere up in the Midlands teaching.
Yes, blimey, yes. Well, I would have been quite relieved, actually. But then I'm a bit of a coward when it comes to pain. So there you have it. So during you would have been, but, obviously jazz was your main thing. With that, did you come across that kind of great moment? Was it the Battle of Booley, where they had the two fractions of the jazz world that met at a festival and started slapping each?
But I mean, I was never really. I liked Acker-Bilk, but when I went to big school when I was 12, I was very lucky, really. There was a jazz club there, and I'd already been playing for a couple of years. And there was a quartet with the music master, who was heavily into Thelonious Monk, and the bass player. I mean, all the other, there were two other boys. It was a quartet. It was the maths master and two boys who were both just finishing they were in the final year of A-level, so they're all much older than me. And the bass player in particular was heavily into Ornette Coleman, so he was playing me Ornette Coleman all the time. And we actually did a recording for the school film where we actually improvised throughout. Right. So I was, it always seemed perfectly natural to me. And then on my 12th birthday, I brought Africa Brass, the Coltrane record. And not long after that, I often tell this story. I was 12 and I was also playing in a mainstream band. And we used to play things like Mood Indigo and Duke Ellington stuff. And after listening to John Coltrane playing Africa Brass a lot, one day at rehearsal, I was playing a solo and I thought, wow, that was great. I'm getting somewhere. That was really good. And the band leader came straight over to me afterwards and said, don't you ever do anything like that again. And then I got thrown out.
Funny.
So basically I was heavily into all that sort of stuff and the more avant-garde free jazz. But because I was playing in dance bands, I didn't have any qualms about that. And then when I was about 15 or so, I discovered Junior Walker and King Curtis and all that sort of soul music. And that was, so my two big influences were free jazz saxophone and soul music.
Right. What about bebop jazz as well? Because, did that come onto your radar?
Well, that's what all the old guys were playing. That all seemed terribly old, passé to me, and that was no. I mean, in later years, I loved Charlie Parker and a lot of that stuff, but I still don't. I've never had any ambition to play it. I was never really a jazz player.
No.
My influences were really Junior Walker and Albert Ayler.
Right, interesting. So when you got to sort of that ripe age of 16, that would have been 1965. This was like, the 60s were sort of rolling in quite sort of strongly at this point. Did you sort of leave school at that age and sort of start to sort of do other things, or did you go on to university and potentially?
No, I was, end of 60. My birthday's in September, so end of 65. I turned 16. The following summer, 66, I started playing with Keith Tippett.
Right.
And then at the same time, just after that, I left school. After I'd finished O-levels, and I started playing in couple of soul bands in Bristol, and then I got a job in the local Palais band, if you remember Palais bands. You old enough for that?
No, I'm going to have to confess. What is a Palais band at this point?
They were resident bands in dance halls, so Mecca and top-ranked dance halls all had 10-piece, 12-piece bands. So I got a job in one of those when I was just 17.
Yes, because during the late 60s, early 70s, my parents used to take us to Pontons and Butlins, and one of them was Weston-super-Mare. Did that circuit ever sort of come onto your radar?
Yeah, I did those as well.
Did you? Have you got fond memories of those holiday camps?
No, they were on.
Yes, well, I could imagine. I did see that film with David Essex and Ringo and various other people. That will be the day, and then Stardust. I always thought though, that especially that will be the day really, captures the essence of a young band or young musician trying to make it in the world of music and pop.
Well, I was, I can remember going to Pontins with my parents when I was about 13 to 14, and I really enjoyed it. I thought it was great. But actually working in those places, I did a couple much later in the 70s when I was actually quite established on the sort of jazz come avant-garde scene, and I was going off to Berlin and doing festivals playing screaming free jazz, and then going back and playing the latest hit songs to a Pontins with a pretty rubbish band the next night. So no, I didn't enjoy them at all. It was just a job.
It was a job. It was a bit humbling, probably, wasn't it? Really.
Well,
Yes.
no, it's boring, but you got paid, so
Yes. And what was it like, sort of, because you would have been that age where you saw the 60s develop, the Summer of Love, psychedelia, and then it sort of, changed quite a lot, didn't it, between that period and then the sort of 70s? You would have been at that age of sort of going, my God, all these amazing, musical scene that was developing. Did that feel quite strange, or did you think, God, the music world? I mean, we look back on it and we know the story so well, but at the time, it must have felt quite like a bit of a blur of kind of bands, events, happenings, the counterculture, hippie culture, and then so many deaths happen, like Brian Jones and Joplin, and then Morrison and Hendrix all dying, and the Beatles breaking up. What was that like for you at that age, where you weren't even 20, probably, or 21?
Well, yeah, it's a long time ago now, but I was much more interested in the free jazz scene and soul music. It was so I was, lots of my friends were into all those sort of progressive bands in the late 60s. I wasn't so much. I was still playing 1970, early 1970. I did 3 months in a nightclub in Beirut playing James Brown. That's what I was doing. James Brown, Sam and Dave, all that sort of Otis Redding, all that sort of stuff from the 60s. That I did a lot of the time, rather than the count. Obviously, I knew what was going on, and it was the whole counterculture thing was very prevalent for young people in those days. But I was really more musically, I was more into the soul.
And what about Motown? Were you also obsessed with Motown at that stage?
Yeah, a bit less so, because by that time it had started to get a bit commercial. But I've always loved Smokey Robinson, and in fact, when I started writing for Working Week, Smokey Robinson was my sort of template, if you like.
Yes. There's a song on Weekend where, God, I can't, it just sounds so familiar to one of those classics from the 60s on Broadway. Do you know the one? Do 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 do.
Yeah, is that in Weekend?
Yeah, there's a song.
The instrumentals you're talking about?
Possibly. God, I don't.
Yes, because I wrote those instrumentals, or at least I wrote the lead lines on those. And that was some of the first writing that I did. It's very likely it's very similar to that.
Yes, no, it's been delightful. I've really enjoyed it. But it's one of those ones where you just on a relaxed day, you'd listen to that album, which is just amazing.
I can think of the track that you mean now, but I can't remember what it's called. But and I'd never thought it was a bit like on Broadway, but actually, I think it probably is. But it's not the same. It wasn't actually a copy. It was, just sort of influenced.
Yes, very. Yes, no, it's been, when you hear a song and you think, who's this slightly similar to, just some little essence sometimes. And anyway. So then as you, as we turned into the 70s then, were you still in Bristol at this stage, or were you moving on?
No, I moved up to London initially in '67, and then and I was playing in soul bands all the time. But then I used to get a bit fed up with screaming up and down the motorway, so I used to go back to Bristol for a bit, and then run out of money and go back to working in another soul band somewhere or other, or another palais. And then in 1970, I started doing. Keith Tippett called me, and started doing Centipede. So I met a lot of the sort of cutting edge jazz players in London and started playing with.
And Keith Tippett, could you kind of explain a little bit more about him? Because he's quite a legend, isn't he?
Yeah. Well, we played together for a while there's a club in Bristol called the Dugout Club, which is also quite a legend. It's where Massive Attack started later, and it was a very cool club. When we were doing it, it was a bit of a slightly dodgy drinking club. So we did that, but then I went up to London fairly quickly. And then when I came back from Beirut in 1970, I'd always kept in touch with him. He was suddenly a big star, and then he formed Centipede. We were always pretty close, really. I worked in all of his big bands. I worked in several of his smaller bands. We had a trio with a South African drummer called Louis Maholo, which did some gigs, and a record called Turn, which we made in 1982, which has become a bit of a free jazz classic of European sort of improvised music, free jazz. And in fact, I just put out a concert from '85 that we did with that trio, which has just come out on Ogun, the record label that put a lot of the South Africans diaspora, I suppose, a lot of their material.
Yes, because with Centipede, then was it a 50-piece band at that stage with his wife Juliet Driscoll? So a 50-piece band is quite an ambitious thing. What was that like to?
What was it like to play in?
Yes,
it was fantastic, but it was a bit of a I don't know. It was a sign of the times. It was totally over the top. Everything about it was totally over the top. But that's what was happening in the early 70s. It was a bit like, people in the rock and roll industry were doing just massive projects, and it was the equivalent of that. But it really started with Keith putting together a band to do a benefit for the new Jazz Centre Society. And he started rowing all of his mates in, and he was very cool at the time. And obviously with Julie as well, they were both a very cool couple. So just about everybody on the contemporary jazz scene really wanted to play in it. So it just got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger.
My God, that must have been incredible, actually. For anybody who saw it live, they must be one of the most memorable moments of their life.
I think it probably was for some people. I mean, the band had not only the jazz scene, but it had Robert Wyatt.
Oh, right.
Bob Fripp from King Crimson.
God, so yes, your A-list really, isn't it, at that stage? How did you then sort of navigate through the 70s? Was it, as you were saying, going from one sort of gig, one band, one country to another, just kind of sometimes doing things for creative endeavours and other things for sort of just for the financial aspect of it?
Well, I was getting more and more into the free jazz sort of improvised music scene, which had always I'd always been. It was always my first thing, really. So I was really doing that, and not. There were periods when I wasn't working very much, so I did a bit of everything. I was doing pop sessions in the daytime. I spent 2 years working in a nightclub in Bond Street.
Yes.
Nightclub music. I did a couple of summer seasons, just about everything, function bands, everything. You name it, I probably did it in those years. But in the meantime, I was also making a bit of a name for myself playing free jazz.
Yes, absolutely.
to predict your next question, by 1982,
yes.
I was bored with because improvised music had got slightly, well, it was getting a bit prescriptive, and there was a sort of general movement that it wasn't really very cool to play anything that involved anything remotely like a melody or a rhythm or anything. And I got tired of that. So what actually happened was that I did a gig up in Newcastle with, oh no, I know what it was. I was on tour with Elton Dean's Nine Cents in Italy, and I was sharing a room with a man called, the trumpet player was called Harry Beckett, who was a very well-known trumpet player at the time, who knew Robert Wyatt very well. And he said Robert Wyatt had called him and said he'd met a young guy who wanted a who he thought was okay and cool, and they needed a horn section for a record. And since it was free, and since it was come through Robert Wyatt, even though I'd stopped doing sessions years before because I didn't want to do that anymore, I said, yeah, okay. So eventually, a month or two later, I did a gig up in Newcastle with Tony Oxley's quartet, which was really heavy duty, very violent, brutal, well, a lot of the time, free improvised avant-garde music. Got on the train, came back down and went to a studio, and we recorded View from a Room, the first weekend record. And it was a bit like a breath of fresh air, really. It was great.
Right. So was that when you met Simon?
Absolutely, yeah.
Right, and that was the kind of the person who sort of led you into this new world. Was that, yes? You said it was a breath of fresh air. Was he full of what had he been up to before then?
He'd been in a band called Scritti Politti. He was basically a sort of came from the punk scene, really. But they'd formed this band Weekend, which was a lot more, and they were heavily into bossa novas at the time. And I'd spent years in function bands and nightclubs playing Girl from Ipanema, and that drove me mad. But they really were really excited about things like Girl from Ipanema. Just put it all in a new light, really.
Yes. So was it you, Simon, and then did Alison? Was she part of it at that point?
Yeah, it was Simon. I mean, the band was really, initially it was Alison, Simon and Spike. It was just the three of them. So initially I was an employed, well, in fact, in principle, I was always just an employed musician, but I became quite, well, Spike has said in the past that I became the fourth member, but I wasn't officially. But I did start writing with Simon, and I did all the gigs, and
Yes.
we only made one album and some singles, but it was great, and I really enjoyed it. And it was just a big change for me.
Yes, but it did. I mean, musically, it's hard to place it really at that point in sort of 1981, because you'd had the sort of punk and then post-punk. There was, goth was happening. There was psychobilly. There was, I don't know, new romantic stuff. I mean, it's kind of Weekend. It seems a very sort of listening to it, you're thinking, God, when that came along, it must have felt like you were the only people doing it. I mean, Sade came along a bit later, and that kind of scene started to happen. But at the time, Weekend, there was not many young bands that sounded like that.
No, I don't think there were. Well, there was Everything But the Girl. They were starting at about the same time, and they weren't that far. They were doing something a bit similar in lots of ways, and we all knew each other. And then there was Carmel as well
from Manchester. Yeah, I suppose so.
So there was a bit of a scene for that, but I mean, I don't think it ever sold a lot of records. We did some work in France, but it wasn't wasn't a big deal. I mean, I think we were quite considered to be quite cool at the time, but mainly probably only in London.
Yes. Well, you've got an album deal on Rough Trade at the time, which obviously, was still in its infancy, really, wasn't it? Rough Trade, but at the same time, it must have been quite nice to have got that sort of on the sort of charts, really. And the album does sound lovely, and like I said, there's kind of a track on it which does sound like do 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 on that one. So
I think that's the one you're talking about.
yeah, so I'll have to have a look to see.
Singing voice.
So what happens to Weekend then? What was the reason for it finishing at this point?
Well, I'm not sure. As I said, I was just an employed musician, but we did a 2-week tour. I think what finally killed it was we did a 2-week tour of France, and for some bright spark in the agency had decided that it would be a really good idea if we did a tour of France in conjunction with what was really a sort of a goth punk band from Ireland called the Virgin Prunes.
Oh yes, I've come across some terrible mix of bands there, aren't there, and styles.
Disaster, and their audience hated us, and our audience hated them. So it was a really difficult tour, and it's one of the few times of the most physically. It was pretty scary. The last one of the gig that we did in Paris, it was one of the more disturbing experiences I've had on a stage, and I've been in some very rough places in the past, but their audience absolutely hated us. And then the final night we did a gig in on a housing estate in Nancy, and it was our audience. And I spoke to the singer afterwards, and he said, "God, that was terrifying." Because it was our audience. It was a disaster, really. And I think Alison just really couldn't cope with it. And she basically stopped singing after that. And for a long time, she didn't do anything musical and trained as a teacher or a physiotherapist. I can't remember, something like that.
Right, God, that was a rather drastic end to a musical career. Yeah. So then after that finishes, 80, 82, 83 time, where's your next kind of calling?
Well, by that time, I was actually making quite a name for myself, certainly in Europe, as a avant-garde saxophone player. But I was round at. I was living in Bristol at the time, but I used to go and stay with Simon when I was in London if I had a gig, and we were still, in quite close touch. And one night he said, I think we ought to form a 16-piece Latin jazz band. And I vividly remember this. I said, "Oh, well, yeah, that's great. If we're really lucky, we might get a gig at the Bull's Head and earn enough to pay our bus fare home." No, it's not at all like that. I've just found out that View from Her Room is a huge hit in this place called the Electric Ballroom. So the next night we went up there and walked into the jazz room at the Electric Ballroom where Paul Murphy was playing, and it was rammed with 18, 19, 20-year-old kids, largely black kids who were dancing to fast Latin jazz, including View from a Room, the Weekend track, which was a big hit there. And some of the music was fantastic. There was one particular track, Chico Freeman track called Pepe Samba, which was just driving Latin rhythm with a lot of quite free saxophone over the top of it. And I thought, I can do this. So we then started doing some gigs with basically I think we had 4 percussion players and a drummer initially. And Harry Beckett again, and a trombone player called Annie Whitehead. And some of those, I started writing properly then, and some of those early gigs, we used to play one tune for like 3/4 of an hour, and it was just driving Latin drumming and a lot of screaming over the top of it.
Excellent. Well, there you go. I suppose it cements the sound, doesn't it?
Mm. And then we gradually started I started writing songs, and the very first thing that actually happened was that Simon wrote. Simon arranged to do a benefit tune record for Chile Solidarity campaign, which was Venceremos. So he then drafted in Robert Wyatt and Tracy Thorn from Everything But the Girl. So you must know all this. This is Venceremos. And he got... Simon was very political at the time, and through his sort of political sort of friends, I suppose, he got quite a lot of things done. So we recorded Venceremos, I think, in 1983, something like that.
Yes.
And then not much happened, but eventually there was a lot of problems with contracts. But then eventually... we did start doing some gigs, and we were making a bit of a name for ourselves, particularly because we had the jazz dancers as well, and we were playing the WAG Club and places like that, and we were starting to pull an audience. And then we signed to Virgin the following spring, I think. And then they put out Venceremos, and we started doing more gigs, and Venceremos did very well. So then we wrote some more, and we gradually, it sort of all blossomed from there, really.
And was that slightly on the, in that slipstream with people like Sade, Diamond Life, and then there was the Face magazine, and suddenly there was this sort of a cool hip scene, wasn't there, happening? Did it feel like you were part of that kind of musical zeitgeist that was developing in the early to mid 80s?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Simon actually introduced Sade. I'm not sure how he knew Sade, but he introduced Sade to Robin Miller, who was our producer. So Robin Miller produced the first 2 or 3 Sade albums, but we'd already recorded with him because he'd done the Weekend record. So we'd done the Weekend album with Robin Miller. So we got him to do so he'd actually recorded Venceremos as well. So we'd already established a relationship with him. We started recording for the Working Nights album. And I can remember Simon bringing Sade in to meet Robin Miller. And also at the same time, I think Simon probably introduced Everything But the Girl to Robin Miller. So Robin Miller was producing Sade, Everything But the Girl, and us. But a lot of that was to do with Simon introducing those 2 bands to Robin Miller.
Blimey.
So we were all lumped in together as, the Great British Jazz Revival of 1985.
Absolutely. And how did Juliet Roberts appear, or how did that term, where was she discovered?
Well, the first, so as I said, as you know, Robert Wyatt and Tracy Thorn sang on Venceremos. The next record we used Julie Tippetts, who was obviously a very old friend of mine, who had been Julie Driscoll. So she did Storm of Light. So initially we didn't have a sort of regular singer. We used another woman called Corinne. Sorry, I'll turn this off a minute.
No, it's okay. It's quite tuneful.
A woman called Corinne Drury for a while, but that didn't really work out. And then she actually joined or started a band called Swing Out Sister.
Oh, Swing Out Sister.
So she
Yes.
did a few gigs with us, but that didn't really work out very well. But we definitely needed. We had really, because things were getting quite. We were getting quite a name for ourselves, and became apparent that we did need to get a regular singer. And Simon, I think we put an advert in Melody Maker. In fact, Simon dealt with all that, and
Right.
he. I can't remember all the details of this. I think Juliet answered it. I think Simon got in touch with her and met her, and then said, "Well, let's try her out because she sounds really promising to me." I can't actually remember.
Yes, but she came along. Yeah, because there was another band, actually. I just sort of kind of came across this the other day. Do you remember a band called Floyd Joy, which was another one of these soul bands that came, soul jazz scenes. So, yes, there must have been quite a nice vibe at the time in London in that area.
It was Juliet was really Carol Thompson was Floyd Joy, and Juliet, they were more or less best friends.
Right. My God. So then in 85, you managed to sort of get the album recorded. Was this, and this again was Robin Miller, wasn't it?
Yeah.
He did it. So what was the songwriting process like? Because it's between you and Simon, isn't it, all together?
Well, it varied. He tended to write. He was much better. I think he was probably much better at writing lyrics than I was, and I think I was probably better at writing the music than he was. So it was quite. He tended to write more of the lyrics. I wrote more of the actual notes, I think. But it's very difficult to remember, and it's all, when you're writing together like that, it's very difficult to say who's written what, because you come up with ideas and then the other person changes it a bit and then you work on it together. And there were some songs that were definitely mine, like Thought I'd Never See You Again. There were other songs like Sweet Nothing, which started off with Simon, but I did have quite a bit of input in that. I did all the horn arranging for it, and quite a lot of the sort of arranging of the general structure of a lot of those songs.
Yes.
But a lot of ideas came from Simon, and certainly things like, Vencer Amos was entirely him. I did the horn arrangement, but the song itself was entirely him. Sweet Nothing was nearly all him.
I think the strongest song on it is "Thought I'd Never See You Again." That was the one that I would still play.
Yeah, people really like that. Yeah.
Because there was another artist, Anita Baker. I know she was American, but again, there was quite an interesting scene. I mean, there was Aretha Franklin bringing out various albums, but that was a bit. They had that electronic sound or that production, which was a bit hard going in the 80s. So it was always nice to hear something that didn't have that. Oh, blimey, that's that 80s Trevor Horn-esque kind of vibe to it.
Exactly. Yeah. No, I mean, a lot of what we did was actually quite radical. I mean, Stella Marina was a really radical track, which was the 12-inch that came out, obviously, with the 12-inch you were talking about earlier on.
Yes, which came, yes, I was very excited by that. Yeah. And did you go out live much around the country at that stage?
Yeah, I mean, the record came out in early 1985, and we spent all summer on the road. We did. We were doing all the big European jazz festivals, because we were young and cool, and we were bringing in the young audiences. So we'd had some amazing gigs in the big European Nice Jazz Festival, and Blue Danube, the Austrian Jazz Festival. We did all the big jazz festivals in Europe that summer.
What about Austria? Did you go to Austria as well?
Blue Danube, that was the Vienna Jazz Festival.
Right. What about Italy? Were you big in Italy? Most people.
Yeah. we got really big in Italy the following year. I mean, we actually pulled 7,000 people in a tent in Rome in 1986 on our own, which was a big audience for Italy. Yeah, we were. Yeah, Italy and Germany were our big markets, really.
Yes, and then with the pressure, I mean, while being on the road, you were having to sort of start to do your follow-up album. What was that experience like for you, Simon and Juliet?
Well, I don't think it wasn't that much of a problem. I mean, we were. I mean, it was very hard work, and it was like a 24-hour-a-day job for several years. But I mean, we used to come off the road, and we'd then have 2 or 3 months to write, and then we'd have another couple of months in the studio, and then we'd put the album out and go out and tour it again.
Yes, but this time Robin's not producing, is he? You're in a different studio. He's still on Virgin Records. I mean, do you have kind of fond memories of that second album?
Yeah. No, it was very good. We used a guy called Ben Rogan, who then actually, I think he produced a lot of the Sade stuff as well. He had been an engineer at Robin Miller's studio. I can't remember why. I mean, I think this was Simon's decision that he didn't want to use Robin Miller again for some reason or other. He wanted to use Ben. So Ben Rogan did the second album was Ben Rogan. So that was a bit different. But we were fairly, the band was very tight, very slick by then. And we knew what we were
doing. So whose idea was it to do a Captain Beefheart cover for your opening? Too much time. Was that a favourite of yours?
Yeah, it always was. Yeah.
Nice.
Despite what I said about the counterculture, I was a huge Beefheart fan, always.
Excellent. Yes, I saw the Magic Band a few times when they were touring the art centres about 10, 15 years ago, when they were still the original ones, John Drumbo French and various other members of that period. But yes, mesmerising music, actually. And Juliet was kind of credited on quite a few of these, Dancing in Motion and Shot in the Dark. So was she bringing in ideas as well at that stage?
Yeah, I mean, she was starting to get involved in the writing, but initially she would sort of help out with writing with the lyrics and things like that, which made sense because she was singing them. So, but that was quite a gradual process. But she did write quite a lot. She wrote more on the third album that we did in New York.
Yes, Surrender. My God, you're prolific. Because most bands have a little bit of a 5-year narrative, I've found. They have the 12-month honeymoon period and then they get a single played. I mean, obviously I was into indie pop, so it would be someone like John Peel, and then the John Peel session, then the first album, things going well, second album going even better. Then the third album can be a bit tricky at that stage because people have been together for a bit too long and they're just starting to get fraught. So what was it like doing Surrender then, your third album?
Well, I wasn't that keen on that. I mean, our manager decided that we couldn't sell any more records in Europe, so we had to break America. So he sent us off to America to record in New York, which cost an awful lot of money with an American producer and largely using American session musicians. I mean, parts of that album aren't too bad, but I'm not very keen on that album.
No, but my God, there's a hell of a personnel kind of.
No.
You must have got dizzy just trying to meet all these people.
Well, no, not really. I mean, they just turned up and did their sessions. But what was rather nice was that quite a lot of those guys were actually recording with Miles Davis up the road as well.
Right, because he bought an album out. Was it Tutu during the mid-80s?
Yeah, but it wasn't that. At that time, he used to just spend a lot of time in the studio recording and a lot of stuff which was never issued. But I did get to play with Lenny Wright, which was pretty fantastic.
Well, I would imagine. Blimey O'Reilly. So when that album came out, again, did that Did you tour that, or was it kind of towards the end of the band?
No, we did tour that, but that actually did kill the band because we were all album came out in the UK, in Europe, and that was all. It was all looking pretty good. We went into Virgin to meet the head of the new. They were setting up a. Virgin had been selling records through sub companies in America. They were setting up Virgin as an American record label in America, and they had a new man in charge of it. So we went into Virgin to meet him, and he was a young black guy, and he said, "We're not going to put the album out." He said, because it's a mixed race band and the white stations won't play a record with a black woman and two white guys on it, and the black stations won't play it either, so we're not going to put it out.
Well, that was a bit of a conversation killer, wasn't it?
Well, it seems ridiculous now. I mean, it seemed pretty ridiculous at the time. I mean, I thought it was just dreadful, but it's just a sign of what America was like, and parts of America are still like.
Yes.
So that was the end of the band, really. Juliet decided she didn't want to do Working Week anymore. She wanted to. Some of her friends were doing pretty well. I've forgotten the name of the band. There were a couple of Junior Giscombe was a good mate of hers, and there was another band. His name completely escapes me at the moment. Another very close woman friend of hers that was starting to do really well in America. And she decided she wanted to do her own thing, so she left. I thought, right, well, that's the end of that then, and I bought a boat and went sailing for a bit.
Yes.
And then I was intended to go off do some long distance sailing, but I got stuck somewhere or other and thought, oh, well, we might as well do another record. So, I remember what happened. Immediately after that, Simon and I went into Virgin and said, okay, well, we'd like to do another record. But they said, well, the last one was sort of all right, but you've just lost your singer, and we think you're probably going to want to do something, a fairly radical jazz record now. So we'll do another record with you, but we're not going to pay you the same sort of budget to record, because the American record cost a fortune. And he said, I mean, it was all very good natured. He said, no hard feelings. This is what the money we'll pay for another record. If you feel you can get a better deal somewhere else, you're free to go. So we said, okay, we'll go. And Simon managed to eventually negotiate a production deal with a recording studio, where basically they stand the costs of recording, and then they take a cut of any recording contract you get. So we did that. We recorded another record, largely with Julie Tippett, and quite a lot of the young up-and-coming jazz musicians. Cleveland Watkins was on it. All sorts of people. Keith Tippett was on a couple of tracks. Alfie Robinson. A lot of the young black up-and-coming players were on it as well. So we did that. We recorded the record, sent it off to Germany. They said, yeah, we want to put it out. And a couple of days later, we got a call from Virgin in London saying, okay, we made a terrible mistake. We want to re-sign you.
Right. Is this the album which is titled Fire in the Mountain?
Yeah.
My God, that is very groovy. So you must have been delighted at that stage.
Oh yeah, not half, because they'd signed off the debt that we'd owed from the third album, and then they had to give us a load of money to re-sign again. It was pretty wild, really.
God, that was knocked out on that.
One of the best working week albums. I think that's on a par with Working Nights myself. But it didn't. We'd never toured it because Julie and Keith Tippett didn't really want to tour. But I think musically and as a record, I think that's among the best. That's as good as anything we ever did. I think it's a fantastic album.
Yes, absolutely. And then you continue with Black and Gold.
Yeah. So a new singer. We just made one record, but by that time, that was our fifth album. Simon and I had been working together for 10 years, and the sort of, I don't know. And it was also the rise of the acid jazz scene, and I think we'd been very cool in the mid 80s, and if you're very cool 1 year, and then about 5 or 6 years later, you're very uncool. So.
Right. Had that very cool magazine, Straight No Chaser, had that sort of come out at that stage?
Yeah, that was part of the big acid jazz thing, yeah.
I do remember sort of wanting to be cool myself during the 80s. I slightly failed, but I did, you buy these magazines hoping it will somehow brush off on you, but it never does it really? But it felt good to hold a copy in my hand and think I was happening. God, you did have again, the musicians on that album were amazing. You had Steve White on drums for one track, and you also had Carol Thompson on backing vocals as well. So you did sort of pull quite an amazing array of people. Who produced it?
I think we did.
I mean,
because I can remember actually mixing some of those tracks. Yeah, we produced it between the two of us.
And that was the end of that. Blimey, that was good. I mean, it was kind of interesting that period because there had been that sort of slight dance scene, and ecstasy had come along. So obviously, a lot of those indie bands I loved started. The ones that decided to keep going rather than just fold because they obviously weren't going to make a dance album or track, sort of did quite well with it, like the Stone Roses and Happy Monday. So dance music was becoming quite fashionable with the indie kids at that stage.
Yeah, it wasn't really that relevant to us, I don't think. Maybe not. We'd sort of run out of steam, really. I mean, I think you were saying that. I mean, a few people have said creative partnerships tend to last about 6 or 7 years, and I think that was it. Really, it just sort of came to a natural end, really. And I also like doing something else. I wanted to do more jazzy instrumental stuff, so I'd started a band called QRZ. I was doing sort of a side project with that, and Simon was starting to do some more production work, and he actually produced the first 2 acid jazz records as the albums he produced. So
QRZ, what does that stand for, by the way?
It stands for I Am Listening to You. It's an amateur radio code.
God,
I'm calling you. Is there anybody there? I'm calling QRZ. That's what it was.
Well, you put a few singles out on 10 records at this stage.
That's right. Yeah.
So that was pretty cool. That was good. And then, sort of, did you then after that go back onto your boat and sail on the seas, or did you have that dream been and gone by then?
No, I was a bit tired by then. As I said, I wasn't, with the acid jazz scene had taken over, by which at that time it had become largely to do with old Blue Note records, which I'm completely uninterested in. And I did with all that. So I actually went and did a philosophy degree for 3 years.
Oh, that was during the 90s. Blimey. What university did you go to?
King's in London.
No, did you enjoy it?
Yeah, it was fantastic. Yeah.
God, that must have been quite a change for you, having 3 years to sort of become a student again.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, no, it was a bit rough because I was the only mature student there.
Yes, kind of really appreciating it, thinking, kids, pay attention, this is amazing. You don't know how lucky you are. Then, and after that, then, how did you navigate that late 90s into the O years?
I moved to Cornwall, and I wasn't doing very much for a bit, but then I can't remember now. It was bit of a. I started playing again. I was always playing with Keith. Was doing some of his big bands. I can't remember. I wasn't really doing very much of my own stuff around then, but I was doing some sort of improvised music occasionally. I wasn't really very busy. I wasn't doing very much at all. And then we had an attempt to restart Working Week, which didn't really come to anything. I did a week in Ronnie Scott's with a band called Working Nights, which was the original Working Week band, but without Juliet and without Simon. I did a few things like that didn't sort of develop at all.
No.
Also, I was doing, there was a Robert Wyatt, a band playing Robert Wyatt's music with all the musicians that had worked with him. I did that for a bit. I did Jerry Dammers started a big band, Spatial AKA, and I was doing that. Simon and I did some work together doing writing stuff. We did some writing stuff and some film music, things like that.
Yes. And has that been what you've been doing kind of up to the present time, doing sort of different projects?
No, I did a record of my own called Stoneface in the mid 2008, 2009, I think it was, with Adrian Utleaf and Jim Barr from the band Portishead.
Oh yes.
And that was largely a lot of sampling in that. We did some gigs of that, but that never really worked as a live unit. And then I had another band afterwards with a wonderful piano player called Zoe Rahman. That worked for a while, for a few years, and then again I had another period of getting fed up, and then I did actually buy another boat with my wife and sell everything pretty much, and we went off sailing for 10 years.
Blimey, that is quite... So did you, just curious, well, did you do most of the world or just little sections of it?
I went to the Caribbean and came back again. I mean, as I said, we'd sold, just about everything, cars and everything that we didn't need to live on a boat. We went to the Caribbean, came back again. And then we didn't really like the heat in the Caribbean, so we went to the top of Norway, and then a lot around Scotland and Outer Hebrides, Shetland, Orkney, places like that, Ireland. And then I started playing again 3 years ago, and since then I've had a complete... I was determined I would never play again. I sold my saxophones, didn't put a saxophone in my mouth for nearly 10 years, and then eventually I started, when we came back, started playing again, and I got in touch with Adrian Utley and Jim Barr, and we formed a band called 137, so we had a record out last year. So that is a working band. We just did... we haven't done a lot of gigs, but we just did Green Man Festival in the summer.
Right.
And we've done some gigs in London and Bristol. And there's some more work coming up with that. And I also did a couple of records of more hardcore improvised music. There's a band called Sarost with an amazing old bass player, a very old friend of mine. So actually, I'm really busy.
Yes, you are very... And you put an album out with 137 as well.
Yeah, that's what I was talking about. Yeah, that came out a year ago.
It's what's the label? Is it your label or somebody else's?
Yeah, no, I put that out on my label, yeah.
God, that's really impressive. So you have a website, don't you? Do you have all the information and all the things that you're doing at this moment?
Yeah, it probably needs a bit of updating, but all the stuff about 137 is on there. All the stuff about the new trio Sarost is on there. And there's a lot of discography and quite a lot of pictures and a lot of videos and things. It's just larrystabbins.com.
Yes, I can see it's here, beautifully designed. Who put the website together?
Hey.
Nice photography. So, what have you got at the moment lined up for the rest of the year and 2026?
Well, I've just done a lovely little improvised music festival outside Bristol a couple of weekends ago, with 137, in fact. Then in a couple of weeks' time, I'm doing a spin-off thing with Adrian Utley and a drummer that I work with a lot called Mark Sanders, who's fantastic. And we're actually playing on Brighton Film Festival. We're improvising to some avant-garde film from the 60s that was made by a guy called Jeff Keane. So that's Friday night. I think it's the 14th.
Yes, Jeff Keane. Right, I'll have a look at that.
Yeah, no, it's pretty wild stuff from the 60s. His films are amazing. So that's the next thing that I'm doing. And then in December, I've got a tour with the trio, with the Saros trio, with Paul Rogers, the bass player, who plays this amazing 7-string custom bass, and Mark Sanders on drums. We had a record we recorded that last summer. Been doing some gigs with that, and it's fantastic. So we've got a little tour with that. We're doing 6 days in the south of England. And then in January, I think 137 are going to Portugal. And then I think we might have a gig in Holland in around Easter time.
Blimey, you really are quite busy, aren't you?
Yeah.
Have you sort of found your passion and love for music again?
Absolutely, yes. Yeah. No, it's great.
Yes.
Really.
And when Simon passed away, were you involved in? I think they had some sort of evening of celebrations. Did you sort of go to that?
Yeah, I put the old Working Week band back together again for that.
Yes, God, that must have. Was Juliet part of that?
Yeah, Juliet sang. I got most of the musicians who were still around that were in the original 85 band that did all the touring and all the recording.
My God, was it an emotional night?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And we closed the show actually, and we did the complete set that we were playing in 85 when we were touring Working Nights. So it was all the material from the Working Nights album.
Crikey. Yes, that was very sad. I was a bit shocked really with Simon. But yes, that must have been terrible. Yes. God, there is so much you're doing. Well, thank you ever so much for your time. This is brilliant to, yes, capture that moment of your musical life, going right back to the late 50s, wasn't it? I didn't realise how many decades there were actually to go through.
Yeah,
So
I've been doing it a long time.
you have actually, but
the nice thing is that since I started playing again after not playing for 10 years, I've got really excited about playing, and I spend a lot of time practicing. And I was really inspired by a quote I read of a man called Pablo Casals, who was a fantastic classical cellist. And someone asked him when he was 93 why he still practiced 3 hours a day. And he said, because I think I'm making progress. And that's how I feel. Even though I'm 76, I think my playing is improving. And that's a very nice feeling when you're 76.
God, yes, absolutely. It's nice to have that kind of little breakthrough moments on anything that you're working on, getting stuck and then working through it. So, yes, good advice, actually. Yes, it keeps you young, doesn't it? So,
Yeah, I think so. Okay.
Okay, look, thank you ever so much. I really appreciate your time, but I'll say goodbye. Have a nice evening. Bye-bye. And that was me in conversation with Larry Stabbins talking about his life in music. I will put a link to his website in the notes below. This has been the C86 show. David Eastaugh. If you want to contact us, feel free. All these interviews have been archived on Spotify, iTunes, Podbean. It's true. Have a great week. Stay safe.